The Second Year, Part 1. It was a beautiful day, that 25th of August, 1886, when Manly and Laura moved into the homestead. A fine day, as fine as our wedding day just a year ago, and it's a new start just as that was, and a new home if it was some smaller. We'll be all right now, you'll see. Everything evens up in the end. The rich man. His voice trailed silent, but Laura couldn't help finishing the Irishman's saying to herself. The rich man has his ice in the summer, and the poor man gets his in the winter. Well, they had got theirs in that hailstorm, and in the summer, too. But you mustn't think about that now. The thing to do was to get things arranged in the new home and make it cheerful for Manly. Poor Manly. He was having a hard time and doing his very best. The house wasn't so bad. The one new room was narrow, 12 feet by 16, and not very long, facing the south with a door and a window on a narrow porch closed at the west end by the old claim shanty. There was a window in the east end of the room. The looking glass was hung beside it in the south corner, and the parlor table stood under it. The head of the bed came close to the window on the other side and extended the long north wall. The kitchen stove was in the northwest corner of the room, and a kitchen cupboard stood beside it. The kitchen dining table stood against the west wall, close to the south end. The carpet from the old bedroom was across the east end of the room, and the armchair and Laura's little rocking chair stood on it, close to each other between the windows. The sun came in through the east window in the mornings and shone across the room. It was all very snug and pleasant. The room that had been the claim shanty was a convenient storage room, and the stock were comfortable in their new barn. Sheltered from the north and west by the low hill and facing the south, it would be warm in the winter. The whole place was new and fresh. The wind waved the tall grass in the slough that stretched from the foot of the hill by the barn to the south and to the east line of the farm. The house was at the top of a low hill, and there would always be grassland in front of it. The ploughland lay to the north of the hill, out of sight from the house. Laura was glad of that. She loved the sweep of unbroken prairie with the wild grasses waving in the winds. To be sure, the whole place was grassland now, except for a small field. 10 acres of cultivated land were required by law before proving up on a homestead, but the grass to the north of the house was upland bluestem, and not the tall slough grass that grew so rankly in the low places. It was haying time, and every day counted in the amount of hay that could be put up before winter. Because of the hailstorm, hay would be the only crop this year. So as soon as breakfast was over on the day after moving, Manly hitched Skip and Barnum to the mowing machine and began cutting hay. Laura left her morning's work undone and went with him to see the work started. And then, because the air was so fresh and the newly cut hay so clean and sweet, she wandered over the field, picking the wild sunflowers and Indian paintbrush. Presently, she went slowly back to the house and her unfinished tasks. She didn't want to stay in the house. There would be so much of that after the baby came, and she felt much better out in the fresh air. So after that, she did as little as possible in the house, and instead stayed out in the hayfield with Manly. When he loaded the hay in the big hay rack to haul to the barn, Laura, already in the wagon, stepped up on each forkful as it was pitched, and so gradually rose with the load until she was on top, ready to ride to the barn. At the barn, she slid down the hay and into Manly's arms, and was safely on the ground. Manly made the stacks in the field with a bull rake. The bull rake was a long, wide plank with long wooden teeth set in it at intervals for the whole length. A horse was hitched at each end, and walking one on each side of the long windrow of hay, they pulled the plank sideways. The long teeth slipped under the hay and piled it up in front of the plank and was pushed along the ground. When there was enough of a load, and it was where the stack was to be, Manly tipped the plank. It went over the top of the hay, which was left in a pile. Several of these piles started the stack. Then, as the horses came to it, one went on each side of the stack, and the rake went on up. Manly followed it and spilled the hay on top of the stack, and then went down the other end after another load. Barnum was good and always walked along with his end of the plank on his side of the stack. But Skip stopped when he had no driver. So Laura drove Skip the length of the stack, and then sat against the sweet hay on the sunny side, while Manly would bring up another load with the rake. When the stack was high enough, Manly raked down the sides with his pitchfork and gathered up all the scattered hay around and against it, making all neat and even. Then he topped the stack with a load of hay from the wagon. So the nice fall weather passed. Nights grew cooler, frost came, and the haying was finished. Manly had mortgaged the homestead for $800, so now he could buy the coal for winter, and it was stored in the storeroom. The taxes of $60, there were no taxes on the tree claim because they had no title yet, were paid. Interest on the notes given for machinery was paid. There was money for seed in the spring and to live on. They hoped until next harvest. The hay had helped. Manly had sold 30 tons at $4 a ton, and the $120 was a year's income from crops.